They emphasize that self-rule is the granting of opportunities, but accompanied by the burden of choice. Every opportunity in the exercise of freedoms and self-rule must be tempered by the consequence of choice. Every right granted must have a corresponding responsibility, and those who enjoy opportunities but neglect the burden of choice cannot be said to be truly free. This paradox of choices and freedoms applies to both individuals as well as institutions. Fellow Kenyans, based on some of these teachings, I believe we have built one of the most robust democracies in Africa. The fields of individual freedoms have expanded, and citizen participation has become emboldened. Our independent institutions have also occupied their rightful positions, and all of this because of the 2010 Constitution. And as I have said in the past, ours is probably one of the most progressive constitutions in the continent and indeed the world. However, since the 2010 Constitution expanded our individual fields of freedom, it also expanded the burden of the choices we make. Even our founding fathers urged the liberated patriots to shift from the status of being subjects to that of citizens when their fields of freedom were expanded. They made it clear that a citizen is someone who understands the responsibility that comes with freedom, while a subject will squander opportunities granted by self-rule and refuse to shoulder the burden of choice. Similarly, I believe the framers of the 2010 Constitution did not envision a situation where expanded fields of rights resulted in diminished responsibility by citizens and institutions. They saw a balance between freedoms and the consequences of choice. But this balance is probably most challenged by the growth of our independent institutions. Their growth has stretched our democratic boundaries to the limit, but it has not cracked them. It has bent the will of the people, but it has not broken it. In fact, any other African country experiencing the political turns and twists that we have experienced in the search of greater perfection in our nationhood, I believe would have burst asunder, and we have seen many such examples across our land and continent. From the nullification of a presidential election in 2017 to an attempt to stop the will of the people as expressed through the BBI, the judiciary has indeed tested our constitutional limits. While I stand by the rule of law, and I will always obey the decisions of the courts, I am also compelled by my position to heed the sovereign and supreme voice of the people of Kenya. And that is why our national conversation today must focus on the consequences of choice. If citizens are required to exercise their will and shoulder the burden of their choices, should the independent institutions therefore not do likewise? In the field of independence, we have expanded the independence in the judiciary. But how should they expand their field of their responsibility and respond to the summons of nationhood? Shouldn't their decisions also be accompanied by the burden of choice? These are the questions of our national conversation, and we should objectively ponder them. And here I must be frank and ask what I believe to be legitimate questions. It is a fact that we were losing close to 1 billion shillings every working hour for the 123 days we held the 2017 election. The question the national conversation should therefore ask is who carried the burden of this choice? Was it the judiciary or the people? The truth of the matter is that it was the people who carried the burden of the choice. Development programs meant to make a difference in the lives of people had to be shelved. The second is that as a consequence of 2017, we initiated, together with millions of Kenyans, the BBI process that was meant to build bridges and create inclusive politics and end ethnic majoritarianism. If the court had subjected its decision to stop BBI to a cost-benefit analysis, in other words, if it had considered the burden of choice, then there are questions the judiciary would have asked. If we indeed were at a constitutional moment, is a decision against BBI a decision in support of the status quo? If BBI were to be stopped, who carries the burden of choice? On whose shoulders will ethnic majoritarianism rest? And who will carry the burden of losing 30% of our national budget every 5 years due to the toxic politics that BBI sought to resolve? The judiciary would have asked itself another question. Can Kenya truly be a democracy if the people are denied the opportunity to express their sovereign and supreme choice at the ballot box on the basis of elevating technicalities over the overriding objectives of the law? Our Constitution, fellow Kenyans, is not a yoke around our necks, but rather it should be a mighty sword that can break the chains that limit all of us as citizens. The moral foundations of justice demands that the judiciary bears the burden of choice and the consequences, therefore, especially when the burden of judicial choices is proposed to be carried out by the people. Fellow Kenyans, as I turn to the national question of our times, as is the national tradition every Madaraka Day, I wish to remind us of an instruction left behind by the founding father of our nation, Mzee Jomo Kenyatta. He said, and I quote, "Our children, born and unborn, may learn about the heroes of the past, but our present task is to make ourselves architects of the future." End of quote. This, fellow Kenyans, was a call to action. It was a call to predict the future by creating it. And against this backdrop, the national question of the moment must be poised. If indeed freedom is nothing but an opportunity to become better, how have we enriched what the founding fathers placed in our custody? Have we made it better than we found it? And has Kenya occupied its rightful place in the society of nations